Bay. Left to die in the snow after being betrayed, she awoke in the arms of a ruthless alpha king. The wind howled across the northern mountains, carrying snow like shards of glass. Trees bent under the weight of winter's fury, and the sun, pale and distant, could barely pierce the gray sky. In the midst of this frozen expanse, a lone figure stumbled through the snow, a woman whose breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling not just from cold but from the sting of betrayal. Elara had been a noblewoman of fair renown, born into a family of honor and influence. Yet honor had not saved her from the treachery that now clung to her like the ice coating her cloak. She had trusted him, her closest advisor, a man she had considered loyal, and he had turned against her, delivering her to death in the frozen borderlands. Her boots sank into the snow with every desperate step. Pain lanced through her leg, a deep, burning ache that slowed her progress. Behind her, the faint echo of horse hooves had faded, leaving only silence and the biting wind. She had no food, no weapon, and barely enough strength to lift her head. The snow around her seemed endless, a white expanse that swallowed sound and hope alike. Elara, she whispered, her voice trembling. The cold stole her words almost as soon as they left her lips. Her breath came in short, visible puffs, and her eyelids felt impossibly heavy. She could feel herself slipping, the warmth of life retreating into the icy void. Just as her knees buckled and she fell to her hands and knees, a sound sliced through the silence, a low growl, deep and resonant. Her heart leapt into her throat. Wolves roamed these lands, and she was alone, weak and unarmed. She tried to crawl, to hide among the snowdrifts, but the sound grew louder, closer. Fear and exhaustion mingled, pressing against her like a weight she could not bear. Then he appeared. He was a figure as tall and imposing as the mountains themselves, cloaked in black furs that seemed to blend with the shadows. His eyes were pale, almost silver, and they burned with a cold intensity that made her skin prickle. Even in the dim light, she could sense the strength coiled within him, the raw, commanding presence of a man who belonged to no one but himself. "Do not move," he said, his voice deep, calm, and commanding. It carried across the snow like a dark melody, and Elara froze. Her fear mingled with awe.
He knelt beside her with surprising speed, his fingers closing around her arm.
The touch was firm, unyielding but not cruel. Warmth radiated from him, and for the first time in hours she felt a spark of hope. He lifted her with ease, her body limp and unresisting, and carried her through the snow as though she weighed nothing. She tried to speak, to demand to know who he was, why he had come, but the cold had stolen her voice. Her lips parted, but only a whisper escaped, barely audible even to her. He did not answer. His silence was not unkind. It was patient, as if he knew she would awaken soon enough. By the time they reached the fortress that crowned the frozen cliffs, the sky had darkened into twilight. Torches flickered along the battlements, casting long shadows that danced across the snow. The gates opened without a word, and he carried her inside, past guards who nodded in silent recognition. She was aware of nothing but warmth, the steady beat of his heart against her back, and the strange magnetic pull that seemed to draw her toward him despite her fear. At last he laid her upon a bed of thick furs beside a roaring fire. The heat seeped into her frozen limbs, and for the first time since the betrayal she felt the grip of despair loosen. Her eyes fluttered closed, exhaustion dragging her into darkness, but before sleep claimed her entirely she glimpsed him. He was standing by the fire, tall and unyielding, watching her. There was no expression she could read, no hint of what he thought. Best, only his eyes, pale and sharp, followed her every movement. Something in them was both dangerous and protective, a paradox she could not understand. Hours passed, though she could not tell how many. When she stirred again, she realized she was not alone. The man, this Alpha King, was sitting beside her, his gaze unwavering. Her heartbeat quickened, partly from fear, partly from the inexplicable fascination he stirred within her. "You survived," he said simply. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it resonated through her like a drum beat.
Most would not have lasted the night. I had no choice, she managed, her voice trembling. He left me.
My own advisor. Her words caught in her throat, tears brimming in her eyes. The betrayal was still raw, fresh, a wound that refused to close. He did not speak for a long moment, only watched her. Then, softly, he said, "Betrayal is a shadow you cannot outrun. But perhaps, here, you may find a new path." Elara's brow furrowed. "A new path? What do you mean?" he said, rising to his full height. "That your life is no longer yours alone. You have crossed into my lands. You are under my protection and my judgment." The words made her shiver. Not from cold. There was authority in them, unyielding and absolute, yet there was also an edge of curiosity, as if he were measuring her worth.
It was a weight she could not ignore. I do not wish for your protection, she said, trying to sound firm despite the lingering weakness in her voice.
I only wish to return home. He shook his head, the pale light of the fire catching the contours of his face. Home is no longer safe.
Not for you. His eyes softened for the briefest moment, and Elara thought she saw something human beneath the mask of dominance and power. But the moment passed. He was the Alpha King, ruthless, unyielding, and untouchable. Days passed, and Elara began to regain her strength. She explored the fortress only under his watchful eye, aware that every step, every movement was observed. She resented it at first, the constant scrutiny, the inability to act freely. But slowly she began to see the reasoning. But the lands beyond the walls were dangerous, teeming with threats both mortal and magical. She also began to notice the strange ways he protected her, subtle yet undeniable. He appeared at her side when shadows lengthened too long, when snowstorms raged with unnatural intensity, when whispers of dark magic drifted through the halls. And yet, he remained distant, aloof, a barrier she could not breach. One evening, as the northern light shimmered across the frozen sky, he approached her in the courtyard. The snow beneath their feet sparkled like glass, and the wind carried a quiet hush that made the moment feel sacred. "You grow stronger," he said, his voice low, almost admiring. "You have endured what few could. That is remarkable." "I survived because I must," she replied, her gaze steady. "Not for praise. Perhaps. But strength is not enough to survive in these lands. You'll need more. Wisdom, patience, cunning, and allies." Elara's heart beat faster. She realized, with a mix of fear and fascination, that she could trust him only partially. But he was not her enemy, but neither was he her friend. He was something else entirely, a force of nature, fierce, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. Night fell, and they returned to the warmth of the inner halls. She could not sleep, her mind alive with thoughts of betrayal, survival, and the enigmatic man who had saved her. She thought of her home, of the life she had lost, and of the strange pulse of life that seemed to stir within her since awakening in his care. And then she felt it, a subtle warmth against her wrist. A mark, faint but visible, glimmering as though it had been placed by magic. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked to him, and his pale eyes met hers, calm and unreadable. "That mark," she whispered. "What? What is it?"
He did not answer immediately. He only studied her, as though weighing her soul against the fate that now bound them together.
Finally, he said, "It is a reminder that your life is intertwined with mine. You may try to resist, but destiny has other plans."
Alara's chest tightened.
She wanted to pull away, to flee, to refuse the bond. But she could not. The mark burned faintly, a pulse of magic and life that was stronger than her will. And in that desk she understood the truth. She was no longer free. Not entirely. And perhaps, she thought with a flicker of fear and curiosity, she did not wish to be. The snow outside continued to fall, blanketing the fortress in quiet, endless white. And in the warmth of the fire, in the presence of the man who was both savior and enigma, Alara realized that her journey had only just begun. The betrayal that had nearly killed her was only the first step into a world of danger, power, and an undeniable dangerous connection. Her heart, though guarded, began to beat with a strange new rhythm. A rhythm tied to the Alpha King, to the frozen lands, and to the fate that neither of them could yet fully see. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the warmth of the fire and the walls of the fortress, whispers stirred. Whispers of destiny, of curses, and of a bond that could either save or destroy them both. Alara closed her eyes, exhausted but alive, and in the quiet the faintest spark of hope flickered in her chest. She had been left to die in the snow, but she had awoken. And now the Alpha King watched over her. The journey had begun. The fortress was alive with whispers and shadowed corridors, a labyrinth of stone and firelight. Alara walked cautiously, the faint echo of her boots on the cold floor reminding her that every movement here carried weight. Outside, the eternal snowstorm raged, a constant reminder that the northern lands were as unforgiving as the king who ruled them. Kaelin the Alpha King moved through his halls with a grace that seemed almost predatory, his eyes always alert, his presence magnetic and commanding. For Alara, every glance from him was a mixture of warning and fascination. She had survived the night, awakened under his care, but surviving was only the first step. Now she had to navigate the rules of his world, the unspoken laws that governed his castle, and the mystery that clung to him like the winter air. At first, she had resisted him. She was determined to remain independent, to claim even a small part of her freedom despite the invisible chains that bound her. But the fortress itself, the harshness of the land, and the subtle dangers that stalked the night left her little choice. Even as she resisted, she felt herself drawn to him, to his strength and the faint warmth beneath the surface of his cold exterior.
One evening, as snowflakes danced against the high windows, Kaelin summoned her to the council chamber.
Torches lined the walls, casting flickering shadows across the stone. He stood at the head of the long table, his cloak of black fur draped like a shadow, and his pale eyes were fixed on her. "You must learn quickly," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "These lands are not forgiving. Knowledge is as vital as strength." Alara swallowed, aware of the weight behind his words. I will do my best," she replied, trying to steady her voice. She had been observing the fortress, the guards, and the strange creatures that roamed the perimeter. Even in her weakened state, she had begun to understand the subtle powers that governed this realm. Kaelin nodded. "Good. Your mind is sharp. That may be your greatest weapon." Despite the compliment, there was an edge to his gaze, a silent warning that her actions had consequences. Past, trying not to flinch, and noticed the faintest hint of curiosity in them, something almost human beneath the dominance he projected. Days passed, each one filled with lessons in survival and power. Kaelin taught her to read the land, to sense danger, and to recognize subtle signs of magic that lingered in the frost. At first, she resented the lessons, but slowly, a grudging respect grew between them. It was during one of these lessons that she first felt the stirrings of something more than mere curiosity. They had ventured into the outer forests, where the snow lay deep and the wind carried the whispers of spirits long forgotten. Best, Kaelin moved silently beside her, his presence a constant, steadying force. "Why did you save me?" she asked suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. Bed. They had been walking in tandem, their breaths mingling in the cold air. Kaelin did not answer immediately. He stopped, turning to face her. His eyes, pale and piercing, held a depth she could not fathom. Base. "Because you were in danger," he said finally, his tone even, almost indifferent. "But there is more to it than that." "You intrigue me. That is, rare." Intrigue? You mean like a curiosity?
A distraction? He inclined his head slightly. Perhaps.
But sometimes a curiosity can change everything. Survival is not just about strength. It is about understanding, adaptability, and sometimes trust. Trust. The word lingered in the air like smoke. She had been betrayed once, left to die in the snow by someone she had trusted implicitly. To trust again was unthinkable, yet the pull she felt toward him was undeniable. It frightened her, made her heart beat faster and her mind reel with questions she could not answer. The days turned into weeks. Elara's strength returned, her movements regained their grace, and her mind sharpened under Kaelin's guidance. She began to understand the unspoken rhythms of the fortress, the subtle signs of power in Kaelin's domain, and the strange magnetic pull that drew her toward the Alpha King despite every warning her heart gave. Their interactions became a delicate dance of words and glances, challenges and restraint. He tested her wit, her courage, and her patience, and she found herself meeting his tests with a mixture of defiance and admiration. She could not deny that he was ruthless, commanding, and unyielding. But there was a part of him that seemed almost human, hidden beneath layers of strength and control. One evening, the fortress was alive with tension. News had arrived of a betrayal within Kaelin's council, a rival lord seeking to overthrow him. The corridors buzzed with whispers, and Elara could feel the pulse of danger in every shadow. Kaelin summoned her to the strategy room, and she entered to find maps spread across the table, his pale hands resting firmly on the edges. "You will help me," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Your insights, your knowledge of alliances and loyalties, it may save this kingdom." Elara nodded, her heart quickening. She had learned much since arriving, yet she still felt the strain of uncertainty. Helping him meant putting herself at risk, yet she could not ignore the knowledge that her actions now mattered, that her mind could tip the scales in this war of shadows. They worked side by side, analyzing threats, uncovering hidden alliances, and tracing the roots of betrayal. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated only by the faint scratching of quills on parchment and the occasional murmur of strategy. At one point she looked up and met his gaze. Kaelin was studying the map, but when their eyes locked, something unspoken passed between them. A flicker of understanding, of connection that neither fully acknowledged. The firelight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp lines and the pale intensity of his eyes. "Elara," he said softly, breaking the silence. "You are remarkable. Few could see what you see, and fewer still could act with such precision under pressure." Her cheeks warmed at the praise, but she looked away, unwilling to let him see the stirring of emotions she could not yet name. "I am only trying to survive," she murmured.
You are doing more than that, he replied.
"You are learning to thrive in a world that seeks to destroy you. That is strength." Their work continued late into the night. As the wind howled outside, carrying snowflakes that clung to the windows like frozen tears, Elara felt an unfamiliar sensation, a fragile sense of belonging. She was still cautious, still wary, but there was a part of her that trusted him, that felt protected by his presence even as he challenged her in ways no one had before. Yet even as the bond between them deepened, shadows lingered. Pate. One night, as she returned to her chambers, she found a note slipped under the door, a warning in a hand she did not recognize. The words were simple but chilling. "Do not trust him. Pay. The Alpha King's interest may not be your salvation." Her heart pounded. Doubt and fear surged through her, threatening to undo the fragile trust she had begun to place in Kaelin. She wondered if the mark on her wrist, the faint pulse of magic that had tied her fate to his, was a blessing or a curse. Was she truly protected, or had she been bound to a danger she could not yet comprehend? The next morning, Kaelin appeared unexpectedly in the courtyard. Snow fell gently around him, though the wind still howled at the edges of the fortress. He studied her with an intensity that made her heart race. "You received a warning," he said, his voice calm, almost knowing. "Do not let it unsettle you." Not all who speak in shadows wish harm. Some simply fear what they do not understand. "And you, Beth, do you understand me?" she asked softly. He paused, his pale eyes locking onto hers. "Perhaps more than you realize," he said. The words carried a weight she could not measure, a promise and a warning all at once.
Days later, the traitor within the council made a move. Alara's insights proved invaluable, revealing the plot before it could fully unfold.
Kaelin acted with decisive, ruthless precision, neutralizing the threat. Alara watched him, a mixture of awe and fear churning in her chest. Best. He was formidable, commanding, and yet, somehow, when he turned to her afterward, there was a softness in his gaze, a flicker of acknowledgement that went beyond mere duty. That night, as the northern lights shimmered across the frozen sky, Kaelin approached her chambers. He did not speak at first, only stood in the doorway, his shadow long against the snow-colored walls. "You have proven yourself," he said finally, his voice low, measured. "Not only in skill, but in courage. That is rare." Elara's breath caught.
I only did what was necessary, she replied, though her voice trembled.
"Necessary is sometimes all that separates survival from death," he said. His eyes softened slightly, a fleeting glimpse of the man beneath the alpha.
But there is more to you than survival, Elara. I see it.
And that intrigues me. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to speak, to ask what he meant, to challenge him as she had so many times before. But the words caught in her throat. Bye. She realized then that the bond between them was shifting, changing, deepening in ways neither of them could fully name. Outside, the snow fell silently, blanketing the fortress in a world of white. Inside, two hearts moved closer, separated by caution, pride, and the unspoken rules of a dangerous frozen land. And yet, despite the uncertainty, despite the shadows that lingered, a fragile trust began to take root. Elara had survived the snow. She had faced betrayal, danger, and uncertainty. But now, in the heart of the Alpha King's fortress, she began to understand that her fate was intertwined with his, not by choice, but by destiny. The storm outside raged on, but inside a different kind of storm had begun. A storm of trust, of curiosity, and of a bond that neither of them fully understood. And as she closed her eyes that night, the faint pulse of magic on her wrist reminded her that her journey with the Alpha King was only beginning. The chains of ice that bound her were not just a frost, they were a fate, power, and a dangerous, undeniable connection that neither could escape. And somewhere deep within the fortress, Kaelin watched, knowing that this bond, fragile though it seemed, might either save them both or destroy them. The northern winds grew fiercer, carrying with them a darkness that felt alive. The snowstorm seemed endless, each flake a whisper of warning, a herald of threats unseen. Elara paced the hallways of the fortress, her mind restless. She had grown stronger in Kaelin's domain, her body healed and her senses sharpened. Yet an unease lingered in her chest. Something was coming, a shadow that even the Alpha King could not fully control. She tried to ignore the gnawing fear, telling herself that Kaelin's presence was enough to protect her. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that survival in these lands required more than protection. It required vigilance, cunning, and courage beyond anything she had yet imagined. That night, the alarm sounded. A sharp, urgent cry echoed through the fortress, waking every soul within its walls. Elara's heart leapt into her throat. She ran toward the source, and Kaelin met her in the great hall, his cloak of black fur swirling around him like a shadow. His pale eyes were stormy, edged with fury, and the air around him crackled with power. "They've come," he said, his voice low, controlled but intense. "They seek you." Dark figures clad in shadowed armor surged inside, moving with speed and precision. Elara's breath caught. She had faced danger before. But this was different. These were trained, relentless, and they moved as one. "Kaelin!" barked, his command both protective and urgent. But Elara did not move fast enough. One of the shadowed figures lunged at her, a cold blade glinting in the firelight. She stumbled backward, the edge grazing her arm, and pain seared through her. Kaelin was upon her in an instant. His hand was firm on her waist, lifting her out of harm's way with a strength that made her gasp. He struck down the intruder with a motion so swift it seemed almost like magic, a blur of movement that left the attackers reeling. "Stay close," he commanded, his voice like thunder as he moved toward the inner chambers. Betrayal. Elara followed, adrenaline and fear propelling her forward. The invaders were relentless. They pressed, pushed, and surrounded them, yet Kaelin moved through them with an almost unnatural precision. Elara realized then that the rumors of his supernatural strength were true. The Alpha King was not just a ruler, he was a force of nature, untamed and unyielding. As they reached a hidden chamber deep within the fortress, Kaelin barred the door, pressing her against him. His eyes burned into hers, and she felt the full intensity of his presence, the power, the authority, and something softer, almost protective. "Bess," Look at me, he said, his voice low but commanding. Do not panic. You are stronger than you know. Ellora's chest rose and fell rapidly, fear still clinging to her like frost. I don't know if I can. You can, he interrupted, his gaze locking onto hers. You must. Trust in yourself. Trust in me. It was in that moment, with the snowstorm raging outside and the shadowed attackers pressing closer, that Alara felt it, the first stirrings of something new within her. A warmth pulsed in her chest, spreading to her limbs, a faint glow radiating from the mark on her wrist. The magic Kaelin had bound to her when he saved her now awakened, subtle but undeniable. She felt strength flow into her, a connection not just to him, but to the land itself, to the forces of frost and shadow that ruled the northern lands. It was as if the very elements acknowledged her presence, lending her power in the moment of need. The attackers surged forward, breaking through the last barrier, and Alara reacted instinctively. She moved with sudden grace, her hands weaving motions that left her bewildered even as she acted. Shadows recoiled from her, the intruder stumbling as if an unseen force pushed against them. Kaelin watched, his expression unreadable at first, then sharpened with recognition. You're awakening, he said, his voice both warning and awestruck. The bond is stronger than I thought. Elara's breath was heavy, her body trembling with the effort. I don't understand. What's happening to me? He stepped close, placing a hand gently against her forehead. It is the power within you, tied to the mark into fate. You have survived betrayal, death, and snowstorms. Breath. Now you will survive this too. But it will require control, focus, and courage. Bass. Together they fought the intruders, their movements in sync, an unspoken understanding forming between them. Ellora's newfound power amplified Kaelin's own, and for the first time, they moved not as protector and protected, but as allies, bound by trust and necessity. When the last shadow fell, silence descended upon the chamber. Snow rattled against the high windows, but the storm outside seemed to soften, almost in response to their victory. Elara sank to her knees, exhausted, and Kaelin knelt beside her, his hand steadying her.
You did well, he said softly, his tone stripped of command for the first time.
Better than I could have expected. She looked at him, fear and relief mingling in her gaze. I couldn't have done it without you. You could, he said firmly. But you needed guidance. You will need it again. And I will be here. Always. The words sent a shiver through her, though she was unsure if it was from exhaustion, the cold, or the weight of the emotions swirling between them. Their bond had shifted, no longer just protector and ward, but something deeper, more fragile, yet more powerful. Days passed in a tense quiet, the fortress prepared for potential attacks while Kaelin trained Alara in control and strategy, guiding her as her power grew. She could feel the connection between them deepening, a bond forged in danger and strengthened by trust. Yet even as she became stronger, doubts gnawed at her. The mark, the magic, the bond to the Alpha King, it all reminded her that her freedom was not entirely her own. One evening, as the aurora shimmered across the sky, Elara stood on the fortress balcony looking out over the snow-laden expanse. She felt a presence behind her and did not need to turn to know it was Kaelin. You're thinking too much, he said, his voice soft but commanding. The mind can betray you more than any enemy. I am not afraid of the enemy, she said, her gaze still on the distant horizon. I'm afraid of what this bond what this power might mean for me. Kaelin stepped closer, his shadow falling over her in the firelight of the torches that lined the balcony.
It means you are no longer alone. That is not a weakness. It is strength.
But strength comes with responsibility, and you must decide how to wield it. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to shrink around them. Bas. Snow fell silently, the wind holding its breath, and all that existed was the bond between them, the tension of power, trust, and a strange, unspoken desire neither could yet name.
Kaelin, she whispered, almost afraid of speaking the words aloud.
What if I fail? What if I can't control it? He lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. Then you will not fail, because I will not let you.
And because you are stronger than you know.
The words resonated through her.
And though fear lingered, a flicker of courage sparked in her chest.
She realized that strength was not just about surviving the snow, the betrayal, or the enemies that sought her life. It was about facing the darkness within herself and choosing to move forward anyway. That night the fortress was quiet, yet the bond between them was undeniable. Elora could feel the pulse of the magic on her wrist, the faint glow echoing the connection she shared with Kaelin. She did not understand it fully, but she trusted it, and for the first time she trusted him. The days that followed were filled with preparation and vigilance. Kaelin taught her to anticipate threats, to read the land and the people, and to harness the magic that now flowed through her. With every lesson, their connection deepened, woven together by shared danger and growing respect. And yet, even as they grew closer, a shadow lingered on the horizon. The enemy who had sent assassins and dark forces was still out there, waiting for weakness. Elara could sense it in the cold, in the restless wind, in the distant howl of wolves. The trials were far from over, and she knew that what awaited them would test not only their strength, but the fragile bond that had begun to form between them. One night Kaelin approached her chambers, his eyes pale and intense. He did not speak immediately, only watched her, and Elara felt her heart tighten with a mixture of anticipation and fear. "You are awakening," he said finally, Batismic. "The magic is growing stronger, and so is our bond. But with strength comes danger. They will come again, and next time you must be ready, or everything could be lost." Elara's chest tightened. "I am ready," she whispered, though doubt still lingered. She did not fully understand the power within her, nor the depth of the bond with the Alpha King. Yet she knew one thing. She would not face the coming darkness alone. Kaelin's gaze softened, the barest hint of a smile touching his lips. "No, you will not. And that may be enough." Outside, the snow fell silently, blanketing the land in white. Inside, the fortress was alive with the quiet pulse of magic and the growing bond between two souls, forged in frost, fire, and destiny. And somewhere beyond the walls, shadows stirred, waiting for the moment when the bond between Elara and the Alpha King would be tested, and when survival alone would not be enough. The descent into darkness had begun. The storm had grown darker, the northern sky swirling with ominous clouds. Snow whipped across the mountains with a fury that seemed almost alive, howling like spirits long forgotten. Psst. Inside the fortress, tension hummed in every hallway. Elara and Kaelin knew the enemy would strike again, and this time it would not be a mere raid. It would be war. Bang. Elara stood on the balcony, the cold biting through her cloak, her eyes scanning the endless white horizon. The faint glow from the mark on her wrist pulsed steadily. a reminder of the bond between her and Kaelin. She had grown stronger over the past weeks, mastering glimpses of the magic tied to her fate, yet the weight of responsibility pressed upon her chest, bound. Kaelin approached silently, his heavy boots leaving soft impressions in the snow. He stopped beside her, the fur of his cloak brushing her shoulder. For a moment, neither spoke, their breaths mingling with the icy wind. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a connection born of shared danger, trust, and a bond that neither fully understood. "They come for us," he said finally, his voice low, carrying the authority that commanded the fortress and yet something gentler reserved only for her.
Elara turned to him, determination flashing in her eyes.
"Then we will be ready." Kaelin studied her, and for the first time a faint, approving smile touched his lips. "You are no longer the woman I found in the snow," he said. "You have become something more. Something powerful." But the first wave of attack came before dawn. Shadows crept along the frozen land, figures clad in dark armor moving with precision and malice. They were led by the traitor who had once betrayed Elara, now fully aligned with dark forces determined to destroy Kaelin's kingdom.
"Stay behind me," Kaelin ordered, though his voice lacked the usual edge of command.
It was softer, protective.
Elara shook her head.
Bait. She had trained, she had awakened powers she barely understood, and she would not be sidelined. "I fight with you," she said firmly, her hand brushing the mark on her wrist. A faint light shimmered beneath the skin, spreading to her fingertips. "I will not hide." Kaelin's pale eyes studied her, measuring, assessing. Then he nodded. "Very well. Then we face this together." Bess. The battle erupted with a force that shook the walls of the fortress. Snow swirled like silver smoke, and the wind carried the sounds of clashing steel and the cries of the fallen. Elara moved with a fluidity and precision she had never known, the magic within her flowing through her like a current, enhancing her reflexes and perception. Kaelin was a whirlwind of power beside her. Each movement was calculated, unstoppable, a blend of strength and grace that left the enemy staggering. Together they moved as one, their bond guiding their actions, their trust unspoken yet absolute. Amid the chaos, Elara confronted the traitor who had once left her to die in the snow. He struck with fury, yet she was faster, her magic flowing through her hands, deflecting blows and creating shields of shimmering frost. She realized then that the mark was not a curse. It was a gift, a conduit for the power that had always been dormant within her. Kaelin arrived beside her, his presence like fire and shadow combined. He struck the traitor with unrelenting force, sending him sprawling. But the enemy was clever and would not fall easily. The traitor's eyes met Elara's, a sneer of malice frozen across his face.
You cannot control it, he spat. "She is yours, Kaelin, but you cannot save her from herself."
"I am not yours to save," she replied, her voice strong and unwavering. "I am my own, and I fight for this kingdom, for myself and for those I protect." Kaelin's gaze met hers, fierce and unyielding, yet there was pride there, buried beneath the storm of his own emotions. They moved together, and in that moment the enemy realized they faced not one warrior but two, bound by trust, power, and destiny. The battle reached the throne room, the center of the fortress, where the enemy sought to claim victory. The walls shook with the force of magic and steel colliding. Elara focused, her hands weaving patterns that summoned light and frost, creating barriers and shields that protected them and repelled the enemy. Kaelin's sword flashed like lightning, each strike precise, unrelenting. He moved, not just as a king or alpha, but as a partner, anticipating Elara's movements, responding to her instinct, their actions intertwined in perfect harmony. Then, The traitor struck a final desperate blow, a dark energy lashing toward Alara. Time slowed. She could feel the pulse of magic from the mark on her wrist, the bond with Kaelin, and the strength that had grown within her. With a surge of will, she pushed back, the frost and light enveloping the enemy in a cocoon of brilliance. The energy pulsed, crackling like thunder, and when it cleared, the traitor was gone, defeated, bound by his own hubris and the combined power of the two who had once been prey and predator. Breathless, covered in snow and soot, Ilara and Kaelin stood together. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the fortress, the snowstorm, and the shadows all faded. There was only the bond between them, tested, tempered, and stronger than ever. Bay, you are remarkable, Kaelin said, his voice soft, almost vulnerable. You faced death, betrayal, and darkness, and yet you rose stronger than I could have imagined.
Alara felt her chest tighten. I did not do it alone.
No, he said, stepping closer, the faint glow of his own power resonating in the cold air around him. Together, we are unstoppable. But this bond, it has changed me as well. She reached out, her hand brushing the mark on her wrist, and the faint glow pulsed in response. It has changed me too, she admitted. I feared it, and yet I cannot imagine facing the world without it. Or without you.
Kaelin's gaze softened, and he inclined his head.
Nor I without you, Bay. The Alpha King rules many, but you rule something I thought was lost long ago. My heart, my trust, and perhaps, in some way, my redemption. Redemption. The word held weight, a promise, and a recognition of the past they had both endured. Psh! She had seen his ruthlessness, his fear of loss, and now she understood the man beneath the crown and the furs, someone capable of love, trust, and change. The storm outside began to wane, the snow falling in gentle flakes, as if acknowledging the end of the battle and the dawn of something new. The fortress, once tense and shadowed, now seemed alive with quiet, hopeful energy. Bask. Kaelin turned to her, his hand brushing hers lightly.
You have awakened more than magic, he said softly.
You have awakened me. Alara's pulse quickened, a warmth spreading through her despite the chill of the northern night. And you have awakened me, she replied, Burris, in ways I never thought possible. For a moment, the world was still. The snow fell silently, the wind hushed, and the fortress seemed to hold its breath. Two hearts, forged in danger, trust, and shared destiny beat in unison, bound by power, courage, and the faint glow of magic that neither fully understood. Days passed in peace. The fortress rebuilt, the council restored, and the northern lands quieted after the storm of betrayal and war. Alara and Kaelin continued to train and grow, their bond deepening, their trust unwavering. They walked the halls together, spoke in the gardens, and shared quiet moments by the fire, learning the subtleties of each other's presence. The magic that once frightened Alara now felt like a part of her, a gift that enhanced her strength, her courage, and her connection to Kaelin. She had survived betrayal, death, and darkness, and in doing so had found not just power, but trust, love, and purpose. Kaelin, once feared as a ruthless and untouchable king, had softened in ways he never anticipated. The Alpha King had found not weakness and compassion, but strength, not vulnerability and trust, but power, Bay. And in Alara he had discovered not a companion, but a partner, a queen, and a mirror of his own growth and redemption. One evening, as the northern lights danced across the sky in shimmering green and silver, Kaelin led Alara to the highest tower of the fortress. The wind was gentle, the snow falling softly around them, and the world stretched out in endless white beneath their feet. "You have changed everything," Kalen said, his voice low, reverent, but "not just for me, but for this kingdom. You have awakened hope, courage, and something more, something I thought lost." Eris smiled, the glow from the mark on her wrist faintly shimmering in response. "And you have changed me. You taught me that strength is not just survival. It is trust, courage, and Kalen's pale eyes softened, and he inclined his head. "Then we move forward together," he said. "Then, not as alpha and subject, but as equals. Bound not by fear, but by choice, trust, and fate." Elara's heart swelled. For the first time since the betrayal in the snow, she felt free. Not free from danger, but free to choose, free to love, and free to face whatever lay ahead with Kalen by her side. The northern lights shimmered brighter that night, casting long, dancing shadows across the snow. The fortress stood strong, the kingdom safe, and two souls, bound by destiny and tested by darkness, embraced a future shaped by trust, courage, and love. The storm had passed. The snow still fell, gentle and silent, but inside, warmth burned bright. The warmth of redemption, connection, and a bond that neither betrayal, death, nor darkness could ever sever. And so, the Alpha King and the woman he had saved from death in the snow stood together, their hands clasped, their hearts aligned, ready to face a world that was no longer frozen in fear, but alive with possibility. The journey had ended, but their story, forged in frost and fire, had only just begun.